Hello, everyone. My name is Marcella Walsh, Live Content Coordinator at AVIXA, and welcome to our second Smart Buildings Power Hour this month. Today's webinar topic is wireless and security. Joining us today is Bob Snyder, Editor-in-Chief, Channel Media, and publisher of Smart Building News, Digital Signage News EMEA, European Solution Provider, and more. For the past 10 years, he has been the content chairman for the Smart Building Conference at ISE. Before I hand the presentation over to Bob, there are a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for 1 CTS, 1 CTSD, and 1 CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view on your transcripts. For any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and all attendees will be placed on mute. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so today's moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of your live stream video box to locate the Q&A icon and click to open. Please do not enter your questions into the chat window. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. And now I'll hand things over to Bob. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to the Smart Building Power Hour. And thank you for joining us for the third in the series, the second in this month. We're going to have twin topics today. We're going to talk about wireless security. We're going to talk about wireless and we're going to talk about security. But specifically in terms of wireless, we're going to be talking about in-building wireless. And this is the human-to-human broadband. We could talk about many other different types of wireless connectivity, but we have other power hours which will be dedicated more to that. So in terms of cybersecurity, we're going to talk without getting into the physical security issues today. Again, for a matter of time, we only have 60 minutes, and it's not going to. We're not going to be able to cover everything in that time. We try in these power hours to dedicate particular topics. Smart building is a huge. It's bigger than huge in terms of a topic. We double up on topics throughout this 10-part series, and we still are unable to cover everything, that's probably involved in the proper way. But the hard part is that you can't contain it to, if we talk here today about, wireless, at some point we're going to talk about IoT as well, even though later on in the program, you can see in number 7, we'll have a whole program dedicated to building IoT. A lot of these topics will gravitate and will mesh up between different of the sessions and that. But today, we're going to try to stick to wireless, the human-to-human kind, and we're going to try to stick to cybersecurity as opposed to physical security. I brought along some industry experts. I think you'll be very pleased to meet these folks, and I'd like to introduce them one by one here. So I'd like to start with Harsha Bashar, who is the founder and MD of KT Labs in Toronto. And KTech Labs provides managed cybersecurity services for the real estate industry, from building security assessments and remediation to practical security, chief security officer, strategic and advisory services. They have developed a 360 prop secure methodology, which they use, and that helps the building owners, developers, building managers, and facility teams to protect their building system and IoT devices. Hasha is a seasoned IT pro, and I want to mention that she's worked for companies like Tata Communications, Bentel Green Oak, HCL Technologies, and SafeNet, preventing cyber threats and protecting buildings, from threats for the past 15 years. Thank you, Harsha, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
And I'd like to introduce Simon Slupe. Simon is the president and CTO of Silver and also the CTO and chair of the Mesh Working Group at the Bluetooth SIG. Welcome, Simon. He is a serial entrepreneur with a strong engineering background. founding Silver, which is a wireless technology provider and the leading provider of a smart lighting control platform as a service based on interoperable and open standards. As a CTO, he's pioneered cutting-edge industrial scale mesh networks based on Bluetooth, and Silver Mesh is a scalable long-range mesh network based on high-performance software stack designed for existing Bluetooth E4.X controllers. It is complemented by a range of reference designs and includes a lot of different products. And we know Simon from the chair of the Bluetooth SIG, the mesh working group, where he actually drove the development of the Bluetooth mesh networking since its conception, contributing knowledge. He's been on stage with us before, and we appreciate him as the author of the mesh model specification that lays the groundwork for interoperability of multi-vendor smart lighting systems. Thank you, Simon, for coming. Thank you. And John, thank you for joining us as well. And John Seglia is the National Sales Director from the Engineering Wireless out. They have a business based on communication service. They're fully licensed general and electrical contractors in the states of Arizona and New Mexico, and provide non-construction, that is the advisory services nationwide. John started working, as in a technical background, working on fast-paced, challenging assignments as an RF engineer and field technician, functioning with responsibility for all sorts of technology at his company. Later, as the DAS solutions manager at his company, he merged that development with the RF engineering program to create a more cohesive team. And today, as national sales manager, and with more than a decade in wireless communications industry, John leads their customer collaboration with various carriers and vendors. And I should mention, I have a note here to mention that they were the top partner for T-Mobile's BYOC program, which is something significant. John, thank you for joining us. And my friend Nicholas Warren is the CEO and co-founder of Winio, but he's also known as the Building Whisperer. And Winio is a provider of consulting services around digital leadership with a primary focus on transforming the real estate industry. Nicholas has extensive knowledge of the ins and outs of building automation, smart buildings, smart cities, connectivity, and IoT in general. I've particularly invited him here because of his thought leadership and a couple columns that he's written in automated buildings. And he often makes public appearances, and he has podcasts and editorial columns. So we're very lucky to have Nicholas with us today. Thank you. That's my team of experts today that have come together. And I'm going to start right away with the cybersecurity topic, because there's just been a recent report, and I want to say that it's based on the fact the convergence of the operating technology in smart buildings and the IT side of smart buildings has created new risks, according to some people. And Kaspersky has reported just recently in a report that's come out that suggests that 4 in 10 smart buildings are at risk of cyber attack, and they can see evidence that this is taking place, even though they suspect it's not particularly targeted. They believe it's happening. And I wanted to start off today's conversation on cybersecurity by asking Harsha, with your experience, would you agree with this number from Kaspersky, and how well prepared do you think smart buildings are to face this kind of threat?
I completely agree to this number. Buildings are becoming increasingly connected and smart. And some of the common hacks that we have seen are taking control of the building automation system or lighting or the security system. And to the point, preventing occupants from using the system and even leaving the building. So Data breaches. We know residential buildings store tenant personal information and credit card information, and we have seen an increase in data breach specifically targeted towards residential buildings. And now when you say how well prepared we are, so I still hear this sentence from the facility team that no one would be interested in hacking us. We are not a bank. We have nothing a hacker would want. Well, this is not true because we know, like to give you an example, a simple search on Shodan, for those who don't know, Shodan, it's a search engine that lists all the devices on internet. So on Shodan, you'll find thousands of insecure building automation systems and cameras across the globe. A hacker just need to search these, go to get the IP, go to the web browser, type the IP, and just all they have to do is apply brute force attack and get access to the building automation system. And if we compare to other sectors like industrial manufacture, I would say real estate is still at a very early stage in embracing cybersecurity.
And at this point, we're just adding more and more devices to the building. And we're, again, we're on the verge of this, IoT revolution where we'll be adding lots more sensors, lots more people counters, lots more devices that are on these platforms that come out that are not necessarily going to be secure. So what is the best way to protect smart buildings, given this environment? And Harsha or anyone else on the panel who would like to address this question of security, feel free to jump in.
Maybe I can go first.
Yeah.
Like I always say this, and we all know that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, being building occupant or facility manager or a security expert. So to address the security concern, I would say implement a comprehensive cybersecurity approach that includes not only the technical aspect, but the non-technical means. So by non-technical means, I say include policies, create policies, procedures to address smart building, train your staff, report as well as the broader factors such as organizational culture, because cybersecurity is more of people behavior. The other thing that brings the technical side of it, and we see a lack of this specifically in the building sector, or we call operational technology, is to have an asset inventory. Unlike IT, create an asset inventory. It is important to identify all the devices and applications in the building network. So conduct a cybersecurity assessment on the building network to understand the risk and the vulnerability. Create a plan to mitigate those risks. And basic cybersecurity practices such as a sound password management is very important. Also, keep the systems updated, have antivirus software, patch the system regularly, and use of a two-factor authentication when you're accessing the system remotely are some of the measures that enhance the security approach.
So it sounds to me like smart buildings are where the IT departments used to be 10 years ago, that they don't feel in most cases that they have something they need to protect, and their stakeholders are reluctant to spend money on it. And at the same time, if, for example, a smart building has been breached, you wouldn't necessarily know it because the company might pay the ransomware and not publicly make an announcement. It's certainly, as you say, it's a human problem, and I believe firmly that integrators have to be part of the missionaries, part of the people who educate the market and insist upon some attention for it. Nicholas, in your experience, have you bumped into security issues?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I really love what Tarsh was saying there. I mean, she touches some of the points that no one's really talking about. And of course, security as a topic is one of them in building automation. No one really talks about it still, which is kind of insane, for lack of a better word. And I love the fact that you said also like the physical aspects and having the organizational awareness that this could be a problem to address these issues. But it's also a fact, I think, with a data strategy, again, like if you're having stuff connected, getting more stuff connected, that this has to be inherently tied to a data strategy as well. And of course, we talk about a lot the OT, so operational technology, IT, information technology, and IoT conversion, right? IT, OT, IoT. And I think that again, like there has to be this overall data strategy where this needs to sort of like be addressed, and then it's a classic sort of standoff between OT and IT. So IT doesn't necessarily want to be addressing the OT issues and vice versa. That has been the problem. But I think what we're seeing now is that everything becomes more from an IT perspective, as an IT layer. I was in a discussion the other day, actually in a podcast, where he was working as a security expert, and he had a commercial real estate firm for portfolio buildings where they hacked the network in some way, shape, or form. And then the only thing that they'd done was to fax over a picture of a bomb to the printer, right? So they printed like a bomb, like a picture of a bomb on the printer, and they said it was a threat. And of course, they had to evacuate the whole building. But the problem was that the FCC, they were in that building, So like the repercussions were dramatic in terms of productivity losses, reputation, and all these kind of things. And especially now during COVID, I mean, getting back to buildings is especially, I mean, that's hard enough, right? Having these sort of like insecurities, so to say, as a company is not good either. And just like a final point is that, I mean, from a reputation standpoint, from a commercial real estate to like an owner or a company, no one cares if it's, like if it's the OT person that's to blame. I mean, what are they going to say? No, it wasn't my fault. It was this person's fault. So I think like what Harsha was saying was spot on, as in it has to be from an organizational change, awareness, not only from the cybersecurity, but also from the physical security, and a change in people to bring this up to light. I think that's spot on. So thank you.
And the issues, in smart building are exacerbated by the fact that we have smart buildings that are different stages. Not everything is a brand new spanking smart building. A lot of them have historical legacy systems where they've even forgotten where some of the gaps in the security might be. And then when people come in and try to integrate, they discover all sorts of new problems in that. So let me ask you this question. Do you feel that smaller buildings, let's say 25,000 square feet or something, do you feel smaller buildings have a different problem than the larger buildings, or is it a common denominator?
I don't know if you're addressing me, but I think it's just it differs. It depends if it's retail, if it's commercial, what kind of things that they're doing in the building, what kind of anything, right? And I don't think it's matter if it's supposed to be smart. I mean, again, like I think like a lot of the industry right now is that connect everything and then expect intelligence. That's not necessarily the case. You might get siloed intelligence or smartness, but you don't get a smart building. So I think you said it yourself. Like buildings are at very, very different stages, and it's very, very important to address those issues and look at an as-is perspective, not only from the building automation perspective. And again, like building automation protocols like BACnet is inherently open. I mean, that's what it's made to be for interoperability's sake, and they were made to sort of like stay in the building. And if someone wanted access, they had to go to the building. Now the problem is with the connectivity, wireless in general, all these kind of things, and of course working remote, everyone can get access. So again, like going on the internet, look at Showdown, finding these things and just going in and wreak havoc. And for a hospital, I read in Germany, I think there was actually a casualty a couple of weeks ago or a month ago where they had gone in, not necessarily done anything with HVAC or ventilation perspective, but they had done something that affected the ORs. So there was someone that actually died because of a cybersecurity breach or attack. So again, like, okay, so the simple answer is every building is different. It doesn't really matter if it's new, if it's old, if it's small, or if it's big. Every building is unique, but then you look at certain parameters to get it so like up to a digital maturity assessment, where security has to be much, much higher on the agenda than it has been and that it is still today.
All right, and Harsha, what is the general advice? I mean, structurally, how does one accommodate security management? That is, do you have software that's supposed to take care of it, or you pinpoint a person in the IT department, or you have a chief security officer, or you hire a consultant or a security? What is the standard recommendation that people should follow in terms of structure?
So yeah, smart building has introduced cybersecurity and has increased the threat. So reorganization and new roles are definitely required at the operational technology, or we call it OT level. So organizational changes like establishing operational technology cybersecurity role, and that is something that many user organization in the building automation sector, they lack. They are dependent either on IT, which yeah, to some extent is good to have the IT and OT convergence, but the way OT works is very different. So have a dedicated role for OT, and which includes both IT skills and facility knowledge, having the knowledge how the overall operations work, having knowledge of the traditional building protocols like BACnet, Modbus, and how HVAC and elevators and different systems they work. So it could be a role of a chief security officer or someone at a director role, or if you're not planning to hire a full-time role, engage a vendor, engage a cybersecurity vendor or a consultant that can help you practice cybersecurity in the building environment.
All right, sounds like good sense. As a member of the press, I had the opportunity to interview Mark Cuban, the famous billionaire, and Mark actually came up through being an IT integrator before he became this media conglomerate. So I asked Mark, saying, if you had to start over today and you weren't a billionaire, how would you, with the knowledge you have now, how would you start over? And he had a very clear answer. He said, I would simply, just go knocking on every door and say, hi, do you have problems with your wireless? Hi, do you have problems with your wireless? And I would just pick up a portfolio of clients, trying to solve wireless problems. To some degree, we are going to be talking about wireless in a minute, but to some degree, I feel like security is such a big issue at the moment that you could practically do the same thing in security, knock on every door and say, look, you need an assessment, you need help, and if you were qualified to provide that assessment and qualified to move them to the next stage, I think you would, I think it would be a business that a Mark Cuban would love to get his hands on, along the way.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to security, but I did want to just ask if anybody had any thoughts on whether the trend to open sources is going to increase or decrease the vulnerabilities. If there's anybody that has any opinions on whether open source, is, you mentioned, Nicholas, that, BACnet being BACnet, at the time, wasn't as exposed as the stuff is today, which runs up to the cloud. Do you think open source is more vulnerable?
Yes and no. I mean, just to get BACnet, or like, it's a legacy system, but I love it because it's also got like BACnet MSTP, you got BACnet IP, you got BACnet Web Services, and also BACnet SC, which is the BACnet Secure Connect, right? So it is maturing slowly but surely to sort of like to more stand or like pass the test of time. And in regards to the open source question, I think it's everything. It depends, but I definitely think that open source has a lot of factors where it's definitely becoming like less vulnerable, because there's so many people battle testing it, using it. And I mean, again, what open source, I mean, a lot of like the Android stuff is open source, Apache Kafka, stream processing. I think like everything today that is being built, and I see like Simon is nodding his head there, he probably can know more about this than I do, but I think like everything today, to be honest, is at the bottom should be or will be open source. Because again, like you get a community of thousands or hundreds of thousands of millions to co-develop this. They test it, they make it more secure. And that is something that, I mean, 30 people, 50 people, 100 people, 500 people in a garage or whatever, they can't compete with that. And so I think like open source definitely, again, like it's the same thing as proprietary doesn't mean secure, and open source or open doesn't mean insecure. That was sort of like some of the points where we talked about at AshRay the other year, right? But I mean, Simon, I think you, sorry if I hope that you have something to add to this. I mean, you're working with, of course, like BLE mesh and all these kind of things.
Yes. So first of all, I would say security is in numbers. So I strongly disagree with the first part of the conversation, the opinions, because you sound like the other party you're talking to is compatible with your language. I mean, the reality is that nobody has a clue. That's the problem. I mean, you're talking IT and OT and chief security officers, and you know these things do not ring any bells at like 90% probably of real estate managers, or they just don't know what questions to ask. They don't know who to turn to. If they turn to someone, like how do they trust what the other party is telling them, advising them? I mean, these guys are lost. And I would say the security is in numbers because the capacity the bad guys have is too small. I mean, they have to pick something, and therefore they leave the other part unaffected because, you know, everything is lying open, almost everything today, right? But there are so many ripe targets that you just don't care about the other part. That's why we don't see cataclysms today, right? So I would say, you know, I very much like the approach, like what, for example, Apple does with iPhones. Like iPhone users, probably they don't have a clue about security, but they are secure because the vendor took care of them end to end. They provided them with biometrics, with strong key cryptography, with key management, with key recovery, everything, right? End to end. So definitely, if vendors take that responsibility to deliver products that cannot be insecure, that's a very good step forward and would address a lot of issues. Like, and legislation here also would help with some basic requirements like no fixed passwords. I mean, it's unimaginable, but today still people are not meeting that requirement, and they're shipping products with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right, as admin, right? And the other remark about the open standards, and I can speak to that from the perspective of open protocol and open specifications, like we are doing within Bluetooth, right? So exactly to your point, Nicholas, this is the number of eyes that can look into that spec that is public. And that's your trust, right? That's your trust. You trust this crowd of people, crowd of researchers. Anyone can spot anything there because everything is open. The blueprints are open. Keys are, of course, private, but everything else is open, and that's how it should be. It's very difficult to build any trust into any non-open product, I would say. The only way probably would be to trust the market cap of the company who stands behind that product. So you trust products from Microsoft, for example, and that's because the value of that company is such that they cannot afford themselves to ship anything that has any problems, right? But other than that,
really? No, just kidding, Simon.
Yeah, so absolutely. Everything that's open, it's by definition positioned to be much more secure than anything that is proprietary.
The interesting point, Simon, you know, if the responsibility is with the suppliers of technology, it makes perfect sense to me, you know, but the problem looking at the landscape of the smart building is that unlike Apple, which will dominate and have an end-to-end. We look like we're going to be stuck for a while with a lot of overlapping technologies, overlapping vendors, and people who have very different ideas. And even if they do bring security, it'll probably be an interesting job to try to integrate everybody's different ideas of security along with the technology and the product lines. And interesting though, I think, obviously if the vendors could stop it in the first place, it's a very good idea. Let's move on to wireless. We'll come back to wireless security, but I want to share my screen again here and say that in terms of the in-building wireless, I want to mention the classic solutions, the signal booster. I'm not going to explain these in any depth at this point. I'm going to assume that most people recognize them as I go along, but signal boosters would be one way to assist in the in-building environment. The micro cells or the femtocells, would be another way to get around problems, and particularly for smaller buildings should be a solution. And of course, the distributed antenna system, which requires two things: a signal source and a distribution system. And even within the distribution system, there are three different types. But given those solutions and the current upgrade to Wi-Fi 6, these would be the more usual traditional ways of coming to human wireless solutions. And I think that it'd be time, John, to draw attention to your background as a communications provider and to ask you, when you go into these buildings and when you have a new client, what's, as a communications consultant, what is the process that you use to first address the building owners about these needs? How does that start off? I mean, how would you know, at what point do you know to recommend one solution versus another?
So in a lot of cases, it comes down to building size, right? So in smaller buildings, different type of solution. Our focus as a company has always been facilities over 100,000 square feet. From a building owner standpoint, they focus on cost per square foot, and with the smaller the building, the higher the cost, because there's typically a set cost in just deployment as a whole for the initial piece of infrastructure to tie the signal sources into. So, looking at size, then looking at capacity. Capacity is another huge factor, and then also building type. So with more buildings focusing on small carbon footprints, having low E-glass, much more dense construction, it creates a dead spot within the more of the cellular side of things, and also first responder public safety type deployment or solutions for signal coverage.
Can I ask, in terms of, for example, you're a partner with T-Mobile, and T-Mobile has this BYOC plan. Can you just describe that plan so the folks know what T-Mobile is offering?
Yeah, absolutely. So T-Mobile has a pretty neat setup that helps with time to market for us. One of the large gating factors that we have is having an actual signal source. So for each wireless provider, the big three now that we have, there's Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. T-Mobile's product that they offer, BYOC, stands for Bring Your Own Coverage. Essentially what that is if we have a customer through Engineering Wireless, say a hospital that has a large facility, they are funding the infrastructure for that cellular network. Well, T-Mobile's product that they have essentially takes that and they'll bring in the signal source, or they'll provide that last piece to have signal provided throughout the system, because without that signal, the system is essentially useless, right? It's a paperweight.
Okay. And the in terms of your business, is there one solution that's more popular than another in terms of, or do you have a lot of hybrid solutions between the different options?
It all comes down to the building size, right? So for us, focusing on those larger buildings over 100,000 square feet, we look at active DAS components. So CommScope, a big partner of ours, utilizing the digital infrastructure that they have for distribution, it really fits. It's IT friendly in a lot of ways. Just from looking at the architecture itself, utilizing category cable instead of coax or fiber, it plays nice in the eyes to the folks that will end up managing or supporting down the road in the future. But there's also disadvantages to things like that with cost. More smarts within it, more of a digital type infrastructure sometimes means a little bit of a higher cost.
Okay. And we have a lot to discuss on wireless, but I wanted to take the opportunity now to turn back to Simon and to ask him about Bluetooth mesh and how does the wireless mesh change the landscape of what's happening inside of the building?
Well, so first of all, I think the mesh based on Bluetooth has been or was a surprise when it arrived back in 2017. It's less of a surprise today, and people are really looking forward to using that technology, and it delivers in areas where it wasn't expected to deliver. Generally, like it scales much better than other IoT wireless technologies like 15.4 based systems or other radio based systems. So we easily go into multi-thousand nodes networks on a single network with Bluetooth mesh, and it just works. And that's mostly due to one very little known architectural approach. In Bluetooth mesh, we have distributed all processing to the very edge. So basically, there is never any central node, be it a network coordinator, or be it a lighting controller, or be it a security management controller. Everything is processed by the edge nodes, right? So the only traffic, real-time traffic that you have within that network is sensory data. So we never do back and forth over wireless. Congestion in low power wireless networks is the key challenge, I would say. So by offloading that network from the necessity to transport back and forth sensor data and commands, we hugely increase the capacity of the network. So from that perspective, it's as I said, not many people realize that, but that really is the key design behind the successful products and implementations. And from buildings perspective, it's a great system for retrofit. I mean, again, buildings that conform to nice IT-based design and hybrid networks and everything, that it's a very small percentage of the market. The real problem or opportunity that we have is the existing buildings. They are full of analog copper and nothing else, and then of course implanting new cables and stuff would be almost impossible. So wireless is probably the only alternative. And the other thing with retrofit projects is that the facility downtime is very often overlooked when you compare technologies, right? But Bluetooth mesh is really the technology that minimizes facility downtime during retrofit. So you basically can do things overnight or over a weekend and plug and play, replace old lights with new lights with sensors, no central control boxes, no cables. It works, right? So that's I think I've highlighted the lesser discussed and lesser known aspects of what Bluetooth delivers, but they are very important from the overall market perspective.
So just a question there. So what you're saying, Simon, the routing table, if you're looking at Zigbee mesh and these kind of things, that's been eliminated from BLE mesh, sort of?
Yeah. So first of all, when you move the decision taking and processing to the edge nodes, to actors. Most of the traffic is local, because you have local sensors like occupancy or ambient light or wall stations, and they interact with local lights, right? So basically they are within 1 or 2 radio hops away, and you know, any routing over wireless starts really working over 4 hops, because then you get some isolation which enables routing, right? So in very basic approach, we don't use them at all, because it's all multicast, publish, subscribe type of locally confined traffic. We call that managed flooding architecture. And of course, there is the option to use what we call directed forwarding. So it's a multipath routing thing, kind of routing thing from source to destination, but they are, again, the decision of the intermediate nodes, whether they participate in forwarding the traffic or not, they are taken independently by these nodes. There is no central guy who is the coordinator or anything. It's fully flat distributed system.
So like the benefits would be as in with the other like early mesh solution, there was a problem adding more nodes to the actual system or new sensors or removing sensors, right? That was always a hassle. But you're saying that that's not really the case then with BLE mesh, that you can add more sensors, you can remove sensors, and the network is going to be more resilient and more robust, so to say.
Yes, and also from the logical configuration perspective, this is a pub-sub system. So if you want to add yet another occupancy sensor that is taken into account by the lights, you just configure it to publish to a space address. That's how we call them. So the occupancy sensor publishes to a room address, which is a virtual address that the other lights are subscribed to. And you do not need to configure the lights at all, because they subscribe like using Twitter, you know. Whoever publishes doesn't even know who subscribes to them, doesn't need to know.
Perfect.
So Simon, you would
sorry
say,
Bob, for taking your role.
Sure. Oh, no, fine, Nicholas, you're more than welcome. So Simon, you would call it a integrator friendly technology, yes? In the sense that
so it enables very nice products, because you know, Bluetooth mesh in general, it's a standard, open standard specification, but it includes features and architecture that enables very innovative products. And my company is Snyder, we are focusing just on that, on a product platform to enable very quick retrofits. So first of all, it uses a concept of design templates, and you can basically configure your network before it's even installed, right? Because all that configuration is done in the cloud virtually, and then once on site, any mobile phone fetches that configuration from the cloud and over Bluetooth distributes to the nodes, and you're done. So basically the on-site job is minimal, and it's not error prone at all, because it doesn't require any, you know, everything has been done already. You don't do anything on site that requires addressing or logical linking of zones or devices and stuff.
So, and with the increase in the amount of product and vendors that are aligning and the acceptability in the market, it's a good commercial bet for integrators if they wanted to invest time and effort in that.
Yeah, that's another thing, you know, cross-vendor interoperability has always been a cornerstone for Bluetooth technologies, right? So audio is the ultimately prime example of that. Like any personal audio device works with any phone or car or whatever. there have been issues years ago, but today everything works, and the same concept and the experience gained over years has been applied to Bluetooth mesh design and operations. So yeah, we are seeing like many commercial vendors offering products, Bluetooth mesh based products, and they all work together. So it's a truly open interoperable system. I think that's another angle of security, if you will, right? That you're safe, your investment is safe, right? Because if vendor A goes away, then you can always have a replacement from vendor B, and it works to the same specification.
Yeah, and in general, that would be an integrator-friendly environment where if you invested the time, you're not captive to the fortunes of a single vendor. All right, John, I want to come back to you now because, you know, I think you should be the person in the right position to tell me about what impact do you think 5G is actually going to have on what we know as the smart building at this point in time and maybe a little bit into the future? I mean, not what it can do in 2030, but you know, as these rollouts are happening and people are talking a good game, what is it on the front line?
Yeah, so in the indoor space, it's going to be a challenge. So you know, working with Verizon, working with T-Mobile, working with all the big carriers, you know, the next few years, their focus is outdoors, right? For the indoor space, it's going to be large venues, you know, the stadiums, arenas, large sporting venues where data throughput is a necessary thing now. You know, with social media platforms being probably more popular than actually watching the game itself, you know, you're going to watch it through your phone. That data is essential. So those are the key focus points. Other smart buildings and large buildings, it's a challenge. I see it really being focused within the you know, large areas within the building, like cafeterias or meeting spaces, and not so much deployed throughout the building as a whole. And that focus, I think, from a carrier standpoint, still won't be for several years.
I can have a small comment there, if that's okay as well.
Sure.
Yeah, is that,
yeah,
if it's okay?
Of course.
No, I think like, I mean, exactly that. I think there's, I mean, the marketing hype is of course like, you know, faster data on all these kind of things, but I mean, indoors for 5G is not necessarily the thing to go with. For industrial purposes, you can have 5G indoors. I mean, I'm in Sweden here and I'm sort of close to AVIXA, and they have some interesting avenues. And then of course, then it's back to physics. And I see that Simon is giving me a hard stare here as well. But there are sort of like where they actually claim that they have 5G indoors. But I think like for me, looking at 5 years for the future in terms of security and interoperability perspective, it's more as in, it's the first sort of standard that is built both for people and machines, as in 2G, 4G, 2G, 3G, 4G was built more for people. 5G is built also for people, but definitely just for machine-to-machine communication. So there's something called network slicing, which is done to sort of like have more of an ecosystem approach. You can dedicate sort of like resources of the what you call like the bandwidth for the specific sort of license, not license, but the frequency. So to do different kind of things. So you can slice it in many different sources, which is definitely going to be in the future for smart buildings. But again, like I definitely agree with John here that in terms of indoor spaces and all these kind of things, it's not going to be that much. And I think that's where we're going to see more wireless mesh solutions that work bi-directional, but they still can transfer data at high speeds, because we also see smart grid, these kind of things, and not only buildings and isolations, but actually talking more to its environment in a secure way, hopefully as well.
And it depends also on the environment too, right? It depends on the user base that's going to be within any given facility. If we're looking at large manufacturing or you know, smart type warehousing, then that's an easy type deployment for, say, more of a mesh type network. If you look at public spaces where you're focusing on the actual public and relying on them to select a network or not, then that's where you look at more of a cellular based type solution for that ease of use. I'm sure everyone's had the joy of walking through airports and ending up in different sections or different terminals and having to reselect your network that you're joining in order to have that data connection. Most of the general public doesn't have the I don't want to say ability, but they don't really see that process and recognize it well enough to efficiently use networks that require more actual intuition.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely agree. It's again like a case by case what you're going to use it for and all these kind of things. But I think like also 5G, just to nota bene, like, NB-IoT, which is more, smaller packets, it's also part of the 5G, so like repertoire. So you can still have like the telco space or like the telco approach to these kind of things. But I mean, again, like wireless mesh and whether it might not be Bluetooth mesh, but I mean, just wireless mesh in buildings, that's what I would recommend as well, definitely. And not necessarily sort of just like the unidirectional stuff, because you don't know what will happen in the future. And it's definitely a lot of owners right now, especially now during COVID, you want to do more things remote, and everyone wants more flexible buildings, and at the end, like to pass the test of time, I think.
One thing in addition to like the mesh networks as well, private LTE is really taking off, especially in the States. It's much more secure. It's easy to manage in most cases, and we're seeing a lot more adoption through smart buildings, through smart warehousing, healthcare, and also just different types of facilities.
Absolutely.
I wanted to mention that, as an observer, it seems that the reality of our situation in terms of, smart buildings is that we're certainly going to have wired networks. We're certainly going to have cellular networks. We're certainly going to have the type of low power network for IoT. And we, from the building owner and the real estate, like Simon said, these people that really would rather not to know about the details. There's an awful lot of technical environments going around network infrastructure. I mean, because one new advancement doesn't seem to be replacing another technology. It seems to be going on a layers, adding layers of networks to what's going on in the building and that. I have a question, and John, I think you'd be the right one to answer this, but to anyone, wants to jump in, is what about the use of 5G on campus setup for interconnection of data between the buildings? Is the educational campus market and its relationship to 5G?
I might not be the best person to answer that right now. I think as a whole, with depends on how you look at it too. 5G from like the cellular provider aspect, it's I think at the end of the day they're going to look to try and offset some of the local exchange carriers like Comcast, Cox, CenturyLink, the big providers to the home. In a campus environment, it's you're more likely to see like a private LTE solution for interconnection between buildings if they don't have the infrastructure in place.
Yeah, they'd probably go with private LTE today. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Okay. And does anyone have any thoughts about satellite internet and any implications for smart building? Is there any? I mean, again, one of the things I read today was some of the new material that they're putting in building construction is actually blocking more signals than helping in that. But does anybody feel that satellite internet has anything to offer? Obviously not. Okay.
Yeah, I think like the silence speaks for itself, maybe. But I mean, for buildings, not necessarily. And it's again like it's sort of like the 5G. So I comment what John said as well. I mean, it's not necessarily for indoor purposes. It's for like the outside. But I mean, for the satellite, then it's probably better for, like having sensors in the desert or whatever, these kind of things, right? I think that's sort of, or agricultural stuff or whatever that is for campus environments. I think like that is a problem, just going back to that question, as in a lot of campuses, universities, schools, districts, and all these kind of things, they don't really have a clue, which goes back to what Simon said in the beginning as well. Like we're talking about data stewardship or data strategies and all these kind of things. They don't know. They don't know where stuff is. They can't explain where it is. They don't necessarily have the people to do these kind of things. And especially now during COVID, all the IT department is doing is just like, monitoring or helping the staff in getting Zoom calls done and all these kind of things. So I think we're like, where the technology is probably like 40 years ahead. Or even more than what the traditional, so like buildings, the organizations that manage buildings are. So of course, like, I don't disagree with Harsha or even myself with what we're saying, but I think there has to be a sort of we have to meet people more where they are today, ask more questions. Of course, we're sitting here on a panel discussing technology because we love this stuff and we're probably huge nerds, right? But I think like most of the 99.9%, they're not. And they don't necessarily know where to start. So just helping them on their journey, recognizing that we're so far ahead that it's unbelievable what I'm seeing on a sort of like a daily basis of what I get questions about. And we need to sort of what do call it, like bridge that gap in the best way possible, but also to realize that the Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stones. It ended because there was like a use of more modern technology. So we need to, I think, take these security things that we know about, the BLE stuff, the wireless stuff for the private LTE, but sort of maybe talk about it in a way that more people, normal people, I would say, understands, I mean, what to do, how to get started, what the value is, and what the benefits would be, right? And I think I mean, for the last 5 to 6 years, I mean, the IoT space has come along really well. Before, which is like we talk about IoT, more about technology, but I mean, like what Simon was saying as well, as in, I think what I'm trying to do and what you were trying to do as well, Bob, is just what are the benefits? What's the problem before? What are the solutions now? How easy it is to actually get going with something that is robust. I think that's really, really important. And I mean, if you disagree, please tell me. I mean, but I mean,
no, so it makes good sense to me, Nicholas. I mean, it makes good sense to me. I wanted to mention, I think a lot of the people that we might have here are used to being involved in sending video, moving video around buildings. And historically, we're reluctant to trust that to wireless. And also, we don't have an idea about security because it's complicated enough to send it around that we've never developed a sense of security about the video. But I think in both senses, it's probably changing. And if, does anyone want to comment on, should people be worried about dropout for, important video, regarding wireless systems? Is there ways to build in redundancy? Is there ways to take that pain away? And John, I'm going to ask you just to, from the side of the cellular, you have companies like T-Mobile, are they, have you had clients that have had heavy video use?
So we have, because of the enormous amount of bandwidth that's required and the data usage that video takes up, especially for high definition video, we don't see too many of our customers utilizing the cellular type providers for that backhaul usage. That's one of the big areas where private LTE has become very popular. For instance, we have a customer, a large nuclear plant, and through scheduled outages that in areas where they typically don't have equipment like video or electronics or wireless networks, they look for a quick deployment method that can handle and sustain that continuous video feed. And for us, the answer was private LTE. And we've had several use cases where that application has proved to work pretty efficiently.
I mean, I think my comment there is that
it's a good suggestion.
I think that my comment is just that it moves more towards distributed intelligence and private LTE, or more like just not throwing data to the cloud and just like expecting. I mean, that is great maybe, but I mean, like it's more like in having local control, maybe sending like 99% or like 1% of the data to the cloud, and letting the rest sort of like work in this private LTE setting or at the edge. And then you can also have this deployed as in AI, machine learning algorithms right at the edge. So it doesn't have to go to the cloud, being massaged in huge data centers, and then go back to sort of the security cameras and all these kind of things. And that is also so like from a European perspective, where we have GDPR, as in anonymization perspective, these kind of things, you can actually have that ingrained into the very cameras, so that the access of the data, it can't be traced back to its source or who the people are, and it's all these kind of things. So I think it's moving definitely in that direction, and that goes along with a security mindset as well as a modern data strategy, in my opinion.
We're running down on time, but I have one question that just came in. It's are these systems, and I believe they're referring to the LTE, are being placed on the internal network for the company? Is it a separate network you're setting up, John?
There's two different ways to do it. You can run internal, hosted it within the facility itself, or you can utilize other services that provide the core for the connection and just the operation of the network itself. Obviously,
Simon,
internally hosted would
something
be a lower cost, right, at the end of the day. And I'm sure Nicholas or Simon, you guys might have some more input.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, generally,
Anybody want to
you're
comment?
looking at multiple networks because you have multiple owners. Like the building network is not the tenant's network, right? And they will never be one because they have different policies and different administration, and so most often you're ending up with multiple coexisting networks, and they serve different purposes and are separately managed. I think it's a great trap to fall into when you try to unify everything, every light bulb on my IT network. Like that's a crazy idea. Why?
What if if the tenant owns the building, does that change things at all?
Yeah, that may change, but that's I would say minority of situations, right? Because most often you have multi-tenant buildings, and the facility managers, they want flexibility, right? And they need, of course, their own network to manage the structure. But then I even heard within my own domain of lighting control that it's a very interesting viewpoint that lights belong to the building owner and switches belong to tenants.
But I mean,
that sounds like the real estate business.
Yeah, exactly.
Go
So
ahead,
blame someone else. No, I think like what Simon is saying is interesting. I mean, okay, so but from your perspective then, Simon, as in what you're saying is that they're going to be definitely separate networks, and why you're logically wise or like unify them all into sort of like a big one, right? But if you have then 5, 6, 7 separate networks, you have the CCTV cameras, access control, lighting, building automation, all these kind of things, it gets messy pretty fast. What do you see in terms, or maybe you don't care, I don't know, this is sort of like a trick question, but what do you see as in for your customers to manage these disparate sort of like different systems? And
Well,
John, for you as well, right? I mean, please.
Yeah, so increasingly we're seeing all of these systems provided as services. So the management is with the service provider, whoever, even lighting, lighting today, majority of retrofit lighting systems are lighting services. So you don't own the lights, even if they are in your room. They are owned by energy company. And your contract is for the light, not for the lights, not for the fixtures, right?
Okay, so you're paying for the lights, lighting as a service.
Like, yeah, services. That's the answer.
I think we're out of time,
Okay.
folks, and that's probably a good place to end on everything as a service, whether it's wireless lighting or security or maybe even moderators. But thank you, folks, for joining us, and thank you, everybody, for bringing your expertise to share it with us at this session of the Smart Building Power Hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks
to
a
our
lot.
speakers, and thank you, listeners, for joining today's webinar, Smart Buildings Power Hour, Wireless and Security. This recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within 5 to 7 business days. If you have any trouble, please contact webinars@avixa.org. A huge thank you to Bob and guests for providing insights into how 5G will impact the built environment and how cyber attackers will attempt to breach a smart building. We hope you have enjoyed. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, experts.
Bye-bye.